We pay our respects to elders, past and present,
for their continuing connection with cultural, spiritual and educational practices,
and extend this respect
to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples. Always was
and always will be.
Good morning. Thank you so much for joining us today. Welcome to the session, which is called The Mobile Revolution, Your Role in Powering Our Planet's Future. My name is Vanessa Liell. I'm one of the co-founders of creative agency Rethink Everything, and I'm very excited to introduce you today to three global changemakers who each have identified an environmental challenge and engaged people en masse to change their behaviour, which is the topic that we're going to cover today. So firstly, welcome to Andy Ridley. Andy is recognised as one of the world's most successful environmental movement creators. He's the co-founder of Earth Hour and most recently Citizens for the Great Barrier Reef. He grew the campaign of Earth Hour to be one of the world's largest environmental movements, spanning 7,000 cities in over 164 countries. So lots to learn from you today, Andy. Secondly, I'd like to welcome Mike Smith on the end here, who founded eco-cleaning venture Zero in 2020, followed by the most funded Kickstarter project of 2019, raising over 700,000 from 7,000 Australian households to get that movement up and running. The mission is to untrash the planet, and its unique circular approach to plastics has removed the equivalent of over 3.5 million water bottles of rubbish from our oceans and from our rivers. So welcome, Mike.
Thank you.
And finally, welcome to Georgiann Reigle. Georgiann is the co-founder of Kingfisher, that was founded in 2016 to revolutionise the ownership experience and drive circularity in the mobile phone industry. Kingfisher breaks down electronic waste cycle by incentivising people to return their devices rather than putting them in the drawer, and then collecting, repairing and refurbishing discarded phones. So welcome to Georgiann, and it's a very exciting day today, so we will get to that during the panel. So please join me to welcome our speakers. So all of our panellists today are founders and entrepreneurs who have identified a single environmental problem that requires behaviour change from everybody to be able to have an impact at scale. While corporations and governments play a part in addressing environmental challenges that we all face, sustainable and long-term solutions require behaviour change from all of us. Today we're going to uncover what these environmental leaders have done to identify the environmental problem and to catalyse that change on a mass scale. Some of the areas that we're going to cover are how they identified that problem, what the critical success factors were to create a movement with genuine impact, what's required to mobilise consumers and actually get people to change, and what we can learn from one industry to take to others and really start to scale that in our country. So I'm going to start with you, Andy. It's a fascinating story. You famously grew Earth Hour from an idea on the back of a beer coaster to the world's largest environmental action, and reaching more than 2.8 billion people globally. You're now doing that the same with Citizens of the Great Barrier Reef. So can you share with us how you took the seed of an idea and turned that exponentially into such a large and participative movement?
Good morning, everyone. Talking about the Earth Hour project, which came to life originally in 2006. The first Earth Hour was 2007, and it was literally, we actually wrote the idea. It did actually really happen. It was on the back of a beer coaster. And then actually what we realised was that the project sort of came out of a sense of frustration at the time that the then government, which was the Howard government at the time, didn't believe that there was actually that much interest in climate or in taking action on climate. And I actually remember being in Canberra and being told, no one's interested, it's not a vote winner. And that may actually be true, I think, but at the time we were like, it was kind of an annoyance that drove a lot of the motivation originally. We had a project before Earth Hour which was called The Future is Man-Made, and it kind of worked, but wasn't anywhere near as successful as Earth Hour, but a lot of the lessons for Earth Hour came out of that. So we kind of learned that we needed, at the time, this is 2006, 2007, we needed hope, not fear. We wanted to be able to, we needed to have a brand that could be used anywhere by everyone and was owned by the community. So the role of the citizen, small c, was really, really important. And it needed to be something that everyone could feel part of, whether you were a 5-year-old or a 90-year-old. And it needed to be, across all of politics. So there's quite a lot of stuff in there. We also realised, and I was talking about this yesterday at a different event, that the creative industries was going to be an engine for it. And I said yesterday, I think it's in all my career working in sustainability, the biggest industry that has had the teeth to make us move forward has been the creative industries. So that's an interesting one as well. And then Earth Hour exploded. So we had it in one city, then the next day, the mayor of Toronto's office rang and said, we want to do this in Toronto in a month. And we said, it took us ages to set this up, but why don't you become the first city to do it beyond Sydney? And then it's 300 cities the next year, then 5,000 the next year, and it just kept on growing. Yeah.
It's an incredibly memorable campaign that I think many of us look to in terms of that global awareness. And I'm really interested in understanding, how much did you have to educate people to bring that idea to life? What came first? Was it the idea? Was it the hard work you did in bringing people along?
I think there was some education involved, but I think it was really, we had with Earth Hour, it was very much, it started as symbolism. And symbolism is really important. Even if you look at Citizens of the Great Barrier Reef, there are multiple reef systems all over the world that are all facing the same issues that the Great Barrier Reef's facing, but the Great Barrier Reef is the most famous reef on the planet. It's probably that and the Amazon are the two most famous ecosystems on the planet. So if you think about them as almost the Great Barrier Reef is the lights off that Earth Hour was, it's the symbol, it's the thing that unites people in a common purpose. So I think, with Citizens, we sort of built it the other way around from Earth Hour. Earth Hour was a symbolic campaign. With Citizens, we built all the conservation machine first, and now we're starting to campaign it, so it's the other way around. So I probably didn't answer the question then.
No, well, I think it'd be fantastic to give a really quick overview on Citizens for the Great Barrier Reef, because you're right, Earth Hour was certainly idea-led and really about engaging people and then having the action follow that, but you've taken the other stand with Citizens, which is obviously an evolution for you as well. Yeah,
well, for me, they all sort of integrate into one big, long project for the last sort of 15 years or something, but with Citizens of the Great Barrier Reef, it's basically people-powered conservation, highly scalable conservation. So the idea is that if you want to reach if you want to get scale in conservation, you need to use every asset you can. So that could be people, it could be boats, it could be virtual volunteering, it could be citizen scientists. It's basically how can you create scale when you've got very limited resources? Or how can you get resources where you hadn't seen them before? So that's basically what it is. And we have two major projects on the reef. One is called the Great Reef Census, which is getting broad-scale reconnaissance pictures, images from across the whole of the area of the Great Barrier Reef, same size as Germany, using a kind of Uber version of a research flotilla. So we use yachts and dive boats and tourism vessels to put people across this massive area. So that's one, and then the other one's the Reef Cooperative, and that's really driven by traditional owners, and that's very, very practical reef restoration work on the Great Barrier Reef.
Fantastic. We're going to talk a bit about the circular economy today, but I think we identify from this panel and the topic that we're talking about is everything fits together. So what you've represented are some globally significant climate change initiatives that look at both raising awareness but also having a positive impact to reduce carbon. And our other panellists today are going to talk more about the circular economy, but I'd love to know, what can we learn from your movements that will help us as we move through these other areas of impact?
Yeah, in a way, I'm certainly learning a lot. The reason why I'm interested in this particular project is because one of the things about conservation is it has a charity model. And we've left things so late with climate change that actually we now need to massively reduce emissions and massively scale up conservation because we've left everything so late. And when I look at the charity model for conservation, of which I've been working in it for years and years and years, I am getting to the point where I'm going, how in heaven's name are we actually going to get the scale that we require if it isn't commercially driven? And that's sort of a weird reality that you have to face, having been in my job for as long as I have. So projects like this have to work, because we must have we must have massive scalable change really, really quickly. And really, I hate to say it, but the only thing that drives that is going to be cash. So, that's what we're learning from this. And I'm wondering what will we learn from what you do that we can start to apply to the conservation side of it.
It's great to have both sides of that, because you're absolutely right. I think there's an enormous job that you've contributed so much to in terms of raising awareness, but the action has to come in really practical ways, and that's what we really want to spend some time talking on today. I'm going to move on, but I'd like to ask you before I do, what would be your top tips for doing something like this in another industry? What have you learned that is most helpful to those that they're in the next stage?
Well, I think that it's got to be simple.
Yep.
You've got to see an advantage in it to yourself, and an advantage into your community. So I think those are sort of three really things. I think being able to see the effect that you're having is another one. So if you're handing in a phone, can you see what happens when thousands of people do it, or millions of people do it? So that's an important thing. Same with the reef. If you're helping, can you see what the difference is that you're making? And the last one is you've got to see, you have to be a bit radical, so you've got to be challenging some systems in there a bit, and I think that kind of gives it that edge.
Yeah.
And finally, probably would be great creative that reinforces what you're doing.
Fantastic. Well, there's plenty in that I think we're going to cover over some of the other topics that we're starting with. So, Mike, I'd like to talk to you a little bit about Zero Co. The products are now adopted by over 9,000 Australian households from... 90 plus thousand Australian households across Australia. Can you share also from you, how did that concept come about, and how did you grow it to start to get mass scale?
Yeah, great. I'm pretty new to the sustainability space. I haven't been in the game for as long as you have, Andy, but hearing you say you're learning about the challenge with the charity-based model to do good in the world was kind of the original insight that I had when I started Zero Co. Long story short, I had a previous business. It was a wine company that I sold. I convinced my wife to pack up our lives and go overseas for a couple of years. The brief for our trip was, let's just go to the craziest, most far-flung places that we can get to. So we spent like 18 months trekking and hiking through some super wild places, living in a tent basically. And I was blown away by the amount of plastic that I saw on that trip. So I came back to Australia and I just said to myself, I'm going to start another company and I'm going to build purpose into that business from day one. And the whole model was, how do we reduce single-use plastic in people's homes and then use the funds from the sale of those products to go and do ocean cleanups. And so in 3 years, we've stopped about 3.5 million plastic water bottles worth of rubbish going into landfill, and we've pulled almost 10 million water bottles worth of rubbish out of the ocean now. And so, yeah, from day one I said, I want to solve this problem, and I don't want to be relying on somebody else's money to do that, because then I'm beholden to somebody else. I want to have full control over it. So I said from day one, let's go and build a for-profit company, but contribute funds from every single sale to funding ocean cleanups. So that's kind of how it started.
And you'd come into a reasonably established market in the sense that what you're doing is radically different, but the market of eco-cleaning products is very mature, very established. There'd been other goes at environmental alternatives for that. How difficult was it to inspire and engage consumers in that change? What role did you have to play to convince them that this was a different way of making a really positive impact?
I think we came along at a lucky moment. I think luck has so much to do with every kind of business journey or any venture, any project you're doing. And we actually launched our Kickstarter project like a month after the first War on Waste series finished airing in Australia, which was just totally fortuitous timing. But it was this moment where everyone, it was the top watched TV show in Australia. So there was like millions of Australians who were like, oh yeah, I do go to the supermarket and buy all this single-use plastic and I chuck it in the bin and it doesn't get recycled. That seems like a dumb idea. And then I just happened to come along a month later and be like, hey, I've got this solution to this problem that you've all just become aware of. So there was definitely a lot of luck in our kind of trajectory. But then we just said from day one, what we're really trying to do is not build a company, we're trying to build a community. We're trying to build a global community of people who care about the planet and want to be involved in the solution to that. So everything we've done from day one was about building community. So launching a Kickstarter campaign to get it off the ground to begin with, saying to the public, hey, I've got this idea, but I can't do it without your help. Can you pre-order a box of goods? And we ended up selling like $700,000 worth of stuff in a month, which just blew me away. I thought we might maybe do $50,000 or $100,000. And then fast forward a year later, we decided to do a capital raise, and we went out to our customers and said, hey, do you guys want to become shareholders? So we did an equity crowdfunding campaign that was the biggest and fastest in Australian history. We raised $5 million in 47 minutes, which was just mind-boggling. But it's all those little things along the way that's been about building community and talking openly to our customers about the challenges that we're facing, being transparent about everything we do, showing all the cleanup, showing the pouches getting cleaned, just having a really open book approach and wearing our hearts on our sleeves and saying, hey, this is a really big problem. We're a little tiny company, we're having a crack at it, and if you guys support us, then we can have an impact together.
And you're trying to reach consumers, you're trying to market a product, and as we discussed before, this is not a non-profit organisation. This is like trying to solve a problem, give consumers what they want in terms of the products that they would like, but provide them the option to do that in a sustainable way. How do you compete with entrenched marketing budgets from the global companies that are in those categories? How do you get the share of voice?
Yeah,
how do you get the take up in that?
It's really hard. It's really hard. So one of the things we said from day one is we're never going to be able to beat the Unilevers and the Procter & Gamble's, the big global guys that have billion-dollar marketing budgets. We're just never going to be able to outspend them. So we have to do interesting, funny, stunty type things that can get media attention. And so we said from day one, let's make the whole thing about the mission. Like, yes, we make amazing products and the products have to work well because otherwise people won't reorder them, but all of our competitors just talk about product every day. Like, this laundry liquid has got these enzymes and it removes this much stains, and they just all talk about product. And so we said, let's just talk about the mission and go and do crazy things. So like last year we went to Egypt to hijack the COP conference, COP27. We had this crazy idea to pull 1 million water bottles worth of rubbish out of the Nile River, and we built the world's largest waste pyramid in the middle of the desert. It was 20,000 kilos of rubbish. And then I slept on top of it for 3 days and broadcast it. We had all this media coverage, journalists dialing in to me on this tent in the middle of the desert. So trying to find interesting and unique ways to talk about this mission and show people the impact that they can have by buying zero-code products instead of buying stuff at the supermarket.
And what have you learnt from that? Like, what have you learnt about consumers, about what works, what cuts through, and what engages them?
What have I learned? I think most people want to do the right thing. And it's kind of weird. One of the things I often talk about is the good thing about the ocean waste problem is that there's no debate about it, as opposed to like the carbon problem and global warming. There's still people that want to debate whether it's real or not. I'm yet to meet a person that's like, yeah, we should put more plastic in the ocean. Or, oh no, there's not enough plastic in the ocean. That's not a thing, you've invented that. So we're not going up against this kind of entrenched disbelief and misinformation campaign that other pockets of sustainability are. So I think people genuinely want to do the right thing. And for us, it's been, how do we make it as convenient as possible for people? Because convenience is king at the end of the day. We make products that people buy and use and throw away every day. So making it convenient is number one. And then how do you make people feel good about washing their clothes or washing their hair or washing their hands or doing the dishes? And the way we try and do that is by reminding them that every single time they are doing a domestic chore, they're actually funding a cleanup project somewhere around the world.
And what you're doing is not easy, I think, by any stretch of the imagination, starting a business in eco-cleaning products to tackle the issue of single-use plastics in an environment where we're awash with stories of greenwashing, of high scrutiny, of what companies are doing at every level of their supply chain, and then having the ambition you do to keep developing further products, to looking at your packaging, and to taking on some global multinational competitors. So I'm really interested, what have been the challenges? Where have you failed? What have been the really hard things that you've had to cut through to make that successful?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think in a strange way, because I'd never worked in this category before and I knew nothing about recycling, I was so naive when I came into this business that I just thought everything was going to be so easy because I was unburdened by any experience in trying to build a circular supply chain, trying to build cleaning products at work, trying to do ocean cleanups. I'd never done any of it before. And so in a strange way, it enabled us to build the whole business from the ground up in a way that we wanted to, not being encumbered by like these big clunky supply chains like the big companies have. But having said that, when we first came up with the idea of how do you build a fully closed loop supply chain, right? So for those of you who don't know, we have a forever bottle that's made from recycled and ocean plastic that you keep at home, and then you fill it up with a refill pouch, and then you send the refill pouch back to us. We clean and sanitize the pouch, fill it back up and send it out to another customer. Which when I came up with that idea one morning in the surf, I was like, oh, this is going to be super easy. We'll just get these pouches and we'll just work out how to clean them. Fast forward like 2 years later and I'm deep in like a 2-year development project trying to work out how do you build a machine that no one's ever built before to clean pouches at scale, because we've cleaned like 300,000 pouches now. So you can't do that by hand efficiently in Australia. And again, I had no experience in building machinery. So that was a pretty crazy project that took twice as long as I thought it was going to take and probably 4 times as much money. And then the next probably biggest challenge after that was how do you incentivize or inspire people to do what we're asking them to do, which is return their pouches, because our business model only works if people do what we ask them to do, which is returning pouches, right? And so that's where we started doing a lot of thinking about how do you change people's behaviour? How do you inspire them to do the right thing? Because it is more, like our model is more inconvenient than just going to the supermarket and buying a bottle of Omo and using it and then throwing it away. Like that's the easiest thing to do, but it's the worst thing for the planet. So yeah, we spent a lot of time thinking about that and building campaigns and like email automations and text messages and marketing campaigns to remind people to do that and then to show them the impact that they have by doing that.
And if you were to give tips to other industries that were starting out now on that journey, what would your top tips be? One of the big learnings that I've really only grappled with over the last 6 months is there's no such thing as a perfect solution, and we live in an imperfect world, and I tried to build this perfect solution, which would be perfect if we lived in a perfect world, but we don't. And so I've started to talk a lot internally in our company about progress over perfection. And if you try and build the perfect solution, you'll never get there. Because if the destination is perfection, you won't be willing to make all of the mistakes and the half steps that get you to that place. That's been a massive, massive learning for me. And I think it's a bit of a double-edged sword because you see lots of companies that say, oh, we're going to do this by 2050, which is great to set an ambitious target, but there's a lot of talk without a lot of action. So my thing from day one has been, let's just start doing stuff today. And we're going to get like 90% of it wrong, and we have got so many things wrong in the journey, but that's how you learn, by inventing things in real time, making mistakes, learning from them, improving and moving on. So I think it's about starting small, starting today, not being afraid to make mistakes, and focusing on progress over perfection. They're kind of the big lessons I've had. Fantastic. And I'm really interested when you share some of that. When you have positioned yourself as a company that is trying to make a positive difference and is operating in that way, how do you manage that communication with consumers and stakeholders in a time where we know there's high levels of consumer scrutiny, where people care about how companies are operating, what they get right and what they get wrong? Some of the challenges we see for companies is operating out of fear, so they're too fearful to say what they're doing unless it's right because of the consumer backlash. How have you managed that radical transparency, as you call it, with consumers, and what have you learnt about consumers in their willingness to accommodate your journey?
When I was first kind of building the business plan for ZeroCo, I was reading Ray Dalio's book Principles, which is an amazing book if you haven't read that. And I'm a big proponent of stealing other people's ideas, like just steal all the best ideas that you come across in the world. And radical transparency is one of his great ideas. And it's really about, if you have nothing to hide, then don't hide anything at all. And so from the very beginning of ZeroCo, I took that to heart, and I decided that I was going to put myself out there publicly, which I'd never done with any of my businesses previously. I'd always been kind of behind the scenes, which was really scary, to be completely honest with you. And I just thought that if we're really trying to build a community and we're really trying to solve this problem, then it needs someone to get out in front of this and talk about the problem, the solution, and what you're doing. And so I think a lot of the tone of voice that we've used at ZeroCo has just kind of evolved naturally from my journey with becoming comfortable putting myself out there in public and being on social media and coming and doing these things. And what I've found is that the more vulnerable I am, the more transparent I am, the more honest I am, the more people rally behind our cause and believe in myself and believe in my team and what we're doing, because there's nothing, we're not hiding anything, right? It's just all out there in the public sphere, warts and all. Every month I send an email to every single one of my customers saying, here's all the stuff we've been working on this month, here's the mistakes we made, here's the things we got right. And I just think, just being radically transparent, it's only the really hateful people that don't respond to that. Like everyone else, it's really hard not to respond to someone who's being vulnerable and honest.
That's wonderful advice, and I think, timely for all of us as we're tackling some of those really big challenges, and having role models like you that are willing to get stuck in and take on the hard things, but also to share their journey on the way. So wonderful messaging there.
Thanks.
Georgiann, it's a pleasure to welcome you here today. We're so interested to talk about mobile phone circularity. I think some of the things that we've touched on today are a little bit better worn than what we're tackling in that model of the mobile phone industry. We all have a mobile phone. We love them. We're attached to them. We like to upgrade them on a regular basis, and we probably don't think a lot about them once we've moved on. But can you explain what are some of the environmental challenges we face with the proliferation of mobile phones?
Sure, thanks. And there's been incredible learnings from Andy and Mike that you guys have shared in this session. From we're only 4 or 5 years into this journey on the Kingfisher side, and with mobile phones, and there's so much to learn from what you guys have done and created already. With regards to mobiles, today in 2023, 5.3 billion phones will end up in landfills or in drawers. And that's an incredibly huge number. And if we think about each of those phones today, every phone that's produces about 81 kilograms of carbon. But the vast majority of that, so 83% of the carbon that is created when a phone is made, is in its manufacture and in its first year of use. And so the idea that we could, so first of all, we're going to keep using these. It's not like these are becoming less prolific around the world. They're incredibly important to our day-to-day lives, more so than any other consumer good in history, probably. And so we need and get an incredible amount of utility from these devices. So it's not about, hey, should we back off from using them? It's about how do we think about the life cycle of phones in a different way. Today, most premium mobile phones are all made to last for 7 or 8 years. But most of the phones that we use are used for a few years, 2-3 years, and then end up in the drawer or in the landfill after that. When actually what we could do with them is we could create multiple life cycles. And if we can create a multiple life cycle for each phone so that the useful life is 7 or 8 years long, then because most of the carbon emission happens at the manufacturer, we're minimizing the carbon impact overall and maximizing the useful life of each phone, which means that we have to manufacture less of them in the future, right? So what we are focused on doing at Kingfisher is driving each mobile phone to have multiple lifetimes such that it's utilized for the full 7 to 8 years.
And I'm really interested in that, and we've talked a little bit about how do you align reducing your environmental impact with the reality of competing commercial demands, and also basically what consumers want, because we know that people love to upgrade their phones. We know that there's a cycle that goes on with new technologies, with new features, as well as the different bandwidths that we can get from the providers. So I'm really interested in, similarly to Mike, how have you tackled those harder conversations and those harder parts of your industry, where you've got the manufacturers that business models rely on the production and the consumption of mobile phones. You've got telecommunication companies that rely on our subscription models and on us progressing to better quality services as we go. And then also consumers that want to do the right thing but also are dependent on those. So I'd really love to hear sort of how has Kingfisher gone about those challenges and what have you learnt on that journey?
Sure. And, one solution to all this could be, hey, why don't we all just hold on to our phones for 8 years each, right? But consumers don't want that. I mean, I don't think anybody in this room has an 8-year-old mobile phone in their pocket right now. And it just doesn't work for us because we want to be able to use the new services and features, et cetera, and cameras, all sorts of things that the new phones allow us to access. So each of us holding onto our phones for that long doesn't work for consumers. It also doesn't work for carriers because if we think about the network operators, they're investing in lots of new technologies like 5G, et cetera, and they want their consumers to be on the latest technology so that the consumers can access the new services that the carriers are offering. So it doesn't work from their perspective either for everybody to hold on to a phone for 5, 6, 7, 8 years, the same phone. And obviously from the OEM perspective, the manufacturers of the phones, well, they obviously have a commercial model around selling more phones, so it doesn't work for them either. But obviously that would be a great outcome for the planet. So how do we kind of bring those things together? And I suppose I kind of said it already when I talked about lifetimes, multiple lifetimes for each phone. So instead of saying that everybody should hold on to a phone for 8 years, we're saying that actually the opportunity is for each phone to have 2, 3, or 4 owners through its lifetime. But there's still challenges to making that happen, right? You can see how that can work. But the challenges are ultimately in that today, the way that we as consumers get our phones is typically on device financing contracts that have lots of rules with them. The opportunities to change our devices and to get them back into circulation into another consumer's hands are riddled with complexities and lots of unknowns. And that isn't a route that is highly utilized today. If we look at how many new device sales are accompanied by a return device, across the globe, that number is about 10 to 15%. And if we have a goal of trying to get to, over time, in a perfect world, getting to a 1-for-1, so that every new device that's sold results in a device that comes back in for recirculation, we're a long ways off today.
And what industries do you look to? You're in an industry that has subscription models, it has quite complicated relationships with consumers and the supply chain. It's not a straightforward, you buy it, you recycle it kind of model. So who do you look to? What are examples, I guess, of industries that are tackling some of those challenges as well?
Well, I might just give some examples in our industry as a start, actually. Yeah. Because, today there are trade-in models all over the world, but most people still don't trade in their phone, right? And we sort of have two challenges. A, how do we make it easier and smoother for consumers to trade in their phone or return their phone whenever they're getting a new device? But then also, how do we change their outlook and their expectations and their behavior kind of from the outset? So in Australia, where Kingfisher launched programs with Telstra, we've seen an increase of 15x in terms of return devices in Australia. Kingfisher supports 2 Telstra programs. The first is Telstra's trade-in program, which allows you to just trade in your phone for a guaranteed price at Telstra, which is similar to what you can see around Australia and around the globe. But Kingfisher also supports a program called Upgrade and Protect that provides consumers with value, flexibility, and convenience when they're returning their phone and whenever they're ready to return their phone. So what Upgrade and Protect is it's you can return your phone and swap out your phone at any time in any condition without fees and penalties, right? And so that flexibility and convenience that we give to consumers has driven a 15x increase in the return rate of devices in Australia. What that also means is with those return devices, what Kingfisher is doing with them is we operate Belong Second Life Store. So Belong is a sub-brand of Telstra that you guys are probably all familiar with, because most of you live here. And Belong recirculates very high quality Second Life devices that create that second use cycle. So today, we're driving circularity in our programs with Telstra here in Australia. And that's where we're seeing really great progress. We're definitely not at the one-to-one yet, but we've made very good progress towards that goal.
That's a wonderful explanation, because I think one of the things that our other speakers have touched on as well is, this isn't about the business, it isn't about the commercial, it's actually about consumers, and it's actually about trying to find a way to have a frictionless experience. So regardless of your vision of what you'd like to achieve, unless you can provide what consumers want in a frictionless way, it's going to be very challenging to change that behaviour. You are launching something today, which is a very exciting milestone for Kingfisher, but also, I guess, acknowledging that this is about, behaviour change with consumers at a global scale that is going to be the most critical part of addressing this environmental challenge. Would you like to share a bit about that launch?
Absolutely, and I think we've got a video teed up to introduce it. So.
We love our phones. Until a new phone comes out. Then that old phone is dead to us. Thrown away. Tossed into drawers. Forgotten. Why? When it still has so much life. Each year, 5.3 billion working phones are withdrawn from circulation. That means more new phones are needed. More resources are dug up. More carbon is generated. Introducing World Phone Amnesty. The next time you buy a new phone, just hand in your old phone. Kingfisher will give it a new life. We refurbish, recycle, rehome, and get it back into circulation. So your old phone can enjoy a new life and make a positive impact on the world. Give your old phone new life. Act now at worldphoneamnesty.com.
Wonderful. Well, congratulations. The launch is today.
Thank you.
And you're here at South by Southwest, which is a fabulous place to hold the global launch and also to hold it in Australia. What's the goal of the World Phone Amnesty? What do you hope to achieve?
Yeah, we're hoping to drive, significant awareness, right, across the globe. I think today the problem isn't well understood, and we're hoping to increase the understanding of not only how big the problem is, but also what we as individuals can do about it. And with that simple step of, when I get a new phone, hand it in. Hand in my old one. That is one simple thing that if each person can if that ends up solidifying in people's memory that is what they can do, and then their phone's going to get a second life with another consumer somewhere in the world. That's what we're hoping to do. So today I mentioned that only about 10% of phones are handed in when people get a new phone, and I think it's as I said, perfection is difficult, and we're looking for progress. If I can steal steal Mike's words, progress over perfection. It's about how far along on that journey can we get to. There's a few places in the world, I mentioned one today, where the return rates are getting up towards 30-40%, and that's fantastic. But we have to create that movement across the globe and continue to move it higher to 50% and beyond.
I'm going to invite questions from the floor. I've got a few more questions, but I will invite questions. One of our team has a microphone, so if you do have questions for any of our panellists today on these topics, please put your hand up and we'll start to move through those. Before I do, I'd just like to ask Mike and Andy about the World Phone Amnesty. What do you think of that as a concept in terms of changing consumer behaviour? What does that resonate for you?
Do you want to go? You go first. I think it's awesome. Where do I do it? Because I actually had a look in my wife's bedside drawer last night in advance of this, and there was 2 phones in there. So where can I take my wife's 2 phones?
We're all guilty, by the way, all of us. Well, if you or your wife is a Telstra customer, you can use the Telstra has a trade-in app, or you can take it into a Telstra store and you can trade it in right there. If you're a customer of another carrier in Australia, they also have trade-in programs, and you can bring it right to your telco's store.
Cool.
Yeah, or their website.
So I think it's awesome, yeah. My question is, do you get money when you hand in your phone? Just a really quick one on that.
Yeah, absolutely. So, most people are surprised by how much their device is worth. And actually, as a part of the World Phone Amnesty, we have an app that you can download, and it will tell you how much your phone is worth. I encourage you to do that.
Is that the one that also tells you how much carbon you're saving?
It is. It is, indeed.
Quick second question was, who is in the industry, the mobile phone telco industry, who do you have to convince to come on board, and who's your biggest opposition?
Great question. So, World Phone Amnesty is all about mobilizing consumers and driving awareness. But ultimately, we need the partnership of the carriers, because the carriers are where consumers go to get their phones and for everything that they need with regards to their phones. So when we engage the carriers in the way that, for example, Kingfisher and Telstra have been working together over the past 3.5 years, then we can create scale success. And so they are the critical kind of gatekeeper. Now the good news is that every telco around the world has sustainability targets at their board level right now, right? They have targets around net zero, they have targets around circularity at the board level. I would say, on average, those have not yet filtered through to the working teams, the commercial teams who design the programs that are working that go to market. It's just starting to. By and large, one of the things we hear in some of those conversations that is interesting is that a lot of their sustainability goals have a challenging business case around them, right? If they need to switch all their energy to renewables, but they have to keep the cost down, those are difficult choices and investment choices ultimately at a board level. These programs are self-funding, and actually more than self-funding. They have a very strong business case and growth case behind them. And so what is exciting is where that is starting to filter into the teams of these telcos around the world is that they're seeing not only something that can solve sustainability goals, but which can also solve standard growth goals and helping them achieve their KPIs. But it's early days, and there's a lot of work yet to do there to get those partnerships up and running all around the globe to drive the scale.
Presumably the phone manufacturers are not going to be pro this because they're going to sell less phones. Is that right?
It's a good question. One of the things that we saw a few years ago is Apple stopped reporting numbers of phones that they sold and started to report total revenue and or total users on the iOS. So that is an indication of an evolution towards looking at how many users they have as opposed to how many devices that they're selling. But there is still there are varying incentives kind of within those companies to manage. Right.
I'm going to move to audience questions. I think it's a wonderful explanation of the challenges that all industries face in trying to drive that change. And I think the World Phone Amnesty is an incredible start, because what we know is that consumer demand drives innovation, but it's behaviour change that creates impact. And the World Phone Amnesty is a leadership role, I guess, Kingfisher is taking, regardless of your own commercial model, to educate consumers globally to think around another way of going about their mobiles. So I will move to our audience questions. Thank you. Please just introduce yourself and who you're speaking to would be great.
Hi, I'm Teresa Miller and I'm a freelance journalist. Georgiann, I'm just interested in a couple of things. Where do most of the mobile phones, the recycled ones, end up? Are they in Australia or overseas? And what do you say to people who are worried about the protection and the privacy of their data?
Great questions. So the second life devices end up both in Australia and overseas. So the first protocol, obviously from a sustainability perspective, is to redistribute them within Australia, because obviously we're transporting them less in that case. And typically it'll be the higher end, better condition devices that are recirculated here, because that's where the demand is. And I already mentioned the Belong as an example, is one source of distribution of those high quality second life devices in Australia. Then the balance of those do go overseas. Sometimes they're going overseas directly into a consumer's hands, or to a retailer, to a consumer. Sometimes they're going overseas to a place that is going to refurbish them, and then go directly to a retailer or consumer's hands at that stage. But 95% of the devices that we collect get back into a consumer's hands. 5% are in not good enough condition to get back to a consumer's hands, and so what we do is we recycle those or break them down for parts, where sometimes 10 devices will come together to create 7 good ones, for example, right? Such that we can get those 7 good ones then back into consumers' hands. So, and your second question is one of the biggest concerns around the globe as to when you ask customers, why haven't you traded in a device? Usually it's because, well, I was worried I might need a backup for a little while, which might be true for a couple weeks as you kind of get all your apps migrated and everything, but certainly once it's still there 5 months later, you probably didn't need the backup anymore, and we all realize that. And then secondly is, I was worried about my data. Now, if you trade in through your telco provider, certainly in Australia and in any country really around the world, you can have, you can have complete trust and faith that they are working with partners that have high-grade security data wiping as a standard step. Most of the time when you drop that device off in the carrier store, the representative from the carrier is going to help you wipe your phone anyways, but then there's going to be an even higher grade security wipe that happens immediately once that phone is received. So I think that's the communication around that can be improved all around the world, and in Australia as well, to help consumers feel confident. Yeah.
Anna Marie Reyes, Executive Producer for Razor's Edge Current Affairs 2SER, owned by the University of Technology Sydney and Macquarie University. Thank you, such a wonderful presentation. I'm actually fielding this question to all of you because a school of thought is emerging around consumer behaviour in terms of the more cheap products you've got or replaceable products you've got, the more you want to consume. And that's apparently happening now with LED lighting. We all want to have LEDs, we have extras now in every bedroom, we have LED in our pockets, LED in the camp, LED with the kids. I'm wondering, in terms of speculative behaviour, have you considered in your programming about the future of consumer behaviour and climate change, in the same behaviour with mobile phones as well? Do we ever get to a point where we stop consuming, or we just multiplier effect? I'm just conscious and curious about your views on that, the future.
Would anyone like to
off?
start with that?
That's a big question.
Yeah.
I think that the world, from a cultural perspective, is only going in one direction, and that is towards a greater level of awareness about the myriad of environmental challenges that we face. And I think people are only becoming more... The level of understanding about the consumption choices that people make and the impact that has on the planet is growing. So there's this tsunami tidal wave of sustainability coming. And I think that's a really positive thing. And I think, you know, in 20 or 30 years' time, we'll look back on today and there'll be so many things. I think about my daughter, where it'll get to a point where she won't understand this concept of, like, you used to drive a car and you went to this place and you got a hose and you put petrol in, and that petrol got dug out of the ground somewhere and put on a ship. Like, that whole concept, to my daughter or her daughter, like, they won't even know of that concept. So I think we are moving towards more sustainable outcomes in every single industry around the world, and I think that's only going to accelerate. And any business that's riding that wave is going to be successful, which is good.
What do you think?
I think the great adventure now is to find scale in projects like this, projects like we work on the reef. And I don't know, I'm not sure where the consumer is. They are bombarded, and it's going to be more bombarded as AI kicks in, is more effective, etc., etc. So I'm not sure. I think it's a bit of a balance there of which way is it going to go. The pessimistic in me would say we're going very much in the wrong direction. But the other side of that is I look at what's been going on the Great Barrier Reef. You know, back in 2016, 2017, we had these horrific mass bleachings, mass mortality of coral across the whole of the system. And the last few years it's been okay, and the reef has seen quite a lot of recovery. But we're going into El Nino year again. This year, we could have the same thing, but my God, the community's got its act together in comparison to where we were when we started Citizens. Like, we could be way more jacked up. We could do much more, and we already are. So I sort of feel like it's a moment where we have to decide which way we want to go, and in multiple different areas. And it's within our capacity to go in the right direction. And there'll be many advantages to it, but it also doesn't make as much money at the moment. And that was my point earlier on, is I think we know how to do these things. I think people want to do these things, but you have to create the environment and a bit more of a reason to do it, and you've got to make it really easy.
Georgiann, have you got a view?
I think it comes down to awareness and then incentives, right? And, you know, each generation, it's what you're saying about your daughter, with each generation, each 10 years, the awareness, and even each 10 years of time, as you're saying, right? The awareness of the issues is becoming so much greater. And so we need to continue to invest in awareness and education around what drives sustainability, what is truly sustainable, not just greenwashing, et cetera, and help everybody understand that better, firstly. And then secondly, it's just it'll be about solving for incentives. So how do we create the ecosystem where the incentives to take the sustainable action, so to buy the second-hand premium good that'll get used in, you know, longer, rather than the cheap and cheerful value good that's just going to go one direction into the waste bin. How do we incentivize that behavior? How do we make that the obvious behavior for a consumer, right? That's going to be the challenge, and that requires systemic change and lots of different parties working together to create the right incentive systems.
And thank you for your question. I'd just add to that from a consumer perspective, everything has trade-offs. So everything that we consume has an environmental impact. And from Australia consumer perspective, I think it's really important that the faster we understand what our options are, what the choices are, how we can engage in these kind of solutions, and how we can close the loop on what we do with the things that we consume, where they go, and how they do get second, third lives, or how they minimise their environmental impact, is going to be the missing point of the puzzle. Governments and corporations can play some role in solving this, but ultimately it's also going to be up to us.
Well, there's that stat you were saying about the number of phones that go into 10 to 15% are brought back or something. Yeah. So the gap in circularity. So this is the amount of stuff that we dig out of the ground to make into cars, phones, energy. Like, I think it's about 8% at the moment gets used more than once. The rest goes back into the air, or it goes into the air in terms of emissions, or it goes into the ground in terms of landfill, or into the oceans in terms of plastics. So there is a massive amount. Like, that's a really shitty number. But the upside to that is there's a lot of room for improvement. But actually, if you could close that circularity gap, you're looking at about a third of the global emissions. So if you just think about, if you want to deal with climate, that's a massive, I mean, you know, I'm sort of being rhetorical, but that's a massive gap that is actually, in some areas, relatively easy, like giving your phone in, to deal with. But unless you've got the models that are actually working, you can do it in everyday life, then it's kind of just a nice buzzy thing to talk about, but doesn't actually move the ball. Yeah. So.
Well, thank you for an incredible discussion. Today was really talking around the mobile revolution and the role in powering the planet's future. What you've provided us is some incredible inspiration around tackling some very hard global issues that affect both companies as well as consumers, and I suppose finding a simple, frictionless way forward that we can really start to look at different ways of doing things that are going to make a difference to our planet. I would encourage everyone to please find out more about the World Phone Amnesty. We have a QR code up the back that takes you to the site. There'll be a fair bit publicly available today around what that means. We thank you for joining us today, and please join me in thanking our panellists.